Has a teacher ever made you cry in class? How? Why? When I was in 3rd grade, a boy stole my homework out of the turn-in bin, erased my name and wrote his name on it. The teacher gave me a 0 and said I should have written my name on my paper if I wanted the grade. You could still see my name under his. My professor for materials science in college was notorious for being extremely hard on people that used cell phones and left early. One day a kid gets a call, answers it, gets really silent and then starts to leave. Our professor was livid, demanding that he come to the front of the class to apologize. And when the kid protests, he practically started screaming. The kid is in tears at this point, walking to the front and apologized to the silent classroom. Yeah, it turns out his grandma died and that's what the phone call was about. In 9th grade, I had this world history teacher, Mr. What? Who had a big issue with spiral bound paper. All I had was spiral bound paper. My parents didn't have money for loose leaf paper because we were dirt poor. He made this huge deal about everyone has $1 for paper in front of my class and pretty much called me a liar, and I cried. He actually sent me to the in-house detention because I was lying and not following his rule about the stupid paper every day for about a week. A nice office lady asked why I kept going to the office because I seemed like a nice girl, so I told her and they gave me a stack of paper, a 3-ring binder and some pencils. My 1st grade teacher got a note from the office saying she was needed home. She was one of the first people who had a cell phone that I knew, so she got it out during class and called home. An EMT answered. Her husband had killed himself and her little boy had seen it. She started sobbing. Therefore most of our class started crying because we knew something really bad happened. She ran out and our principal came in about a minute later and finished the day out for MRS. Capital S. She didn't come back for a few weeks. Our substitute teacher had all of us make cards for MRS. And I remember I tried to draw a rose and tell her how sorry I was. Edit. Yes. I spelled principal wrong. I get it. I had a teacher that would openly mock me in class regularly, and then when I tried to hide behind my hair because I was crying would make me stand up and tie my hair back so everyone could see that I was crying. Yep. Duck that guy. My 1st grade teacher mocked me for not knowing how to tie my shoelace. I liked Velcro, but she complained it made too much noise. She wanted me tested for a learning disability. I tie my shoes like a pro, Mrs. Redacted. And I never make my students feel the way you made me feel. He made the entire class cry. Said he got $1,000 for each one of us crying. My 4th grade teacher called me stupid in front of the whole class because I got the lowest score on a math test. Then made fun of me for crying and called me a cribbaby. My mom wouldn't believe me when I told her and my dad just laughed. Turns out I had dyscalculia. Thanks. MRS. H for destroying my self-esteem. I still remember it 15 years later. She wouldn't let me go back to my locker to get my graphing calculator before a test. She had two on her desk and I couldn't use those either because I should have brought my own. She told me I had to take the test without it. But the problems on the test were impossible to do without a graphing calculator. The girl I sat next to saw me crying at my desk as the teacher passed out the test, and went around to every kid in the class asking if they had an extra calculator I could use, and ended up getting one for me. She was one of the nicest, most popular people in school. And I was so shy that thinking about it later I wasn't sure I would have done that for another student. I did try to be nicer to people after that. That teacher was always horrible though. I was sent home to retrieve my textbook, NVM that I did my homework. Had everything else with me and I could share my friend's textbook. Even though I lived 40 minutes away by bike. So by the time I would be back, class would already be over. I cried the entire bike ride home because the teacher was so angry at me. I have never caused any trouble before. I cried even harder when my friends told me other people also didn't bring their textbook but didn't have to go home to get it. I'm still upset about it. 10 years later. Not me, but in middle school there was this girl in our class who I thought was pretty cute. She was giving a presentation when the teacher interrupted and asked her to sit down. He whispered something along the lines of, "You're ugly, take a seat." The girl went to her desk and started sobbing with her head in her arms. Turns out the teacher was a pedophile too and recently got fired. Duck that guy. My high school art teacher, when he reviewed my portfolio and said he hoped I wasn't planning on using it to get into art school when he knew damn well I was and had spent all year pouring my heart into it. Anywho, I did get into art school and ended up turning down my place, so duck you, Mr. McConaughey. My 7th grade math teacher played Monty Python and the Holy Grail in class. I was laughing so hard that I cried. So he indirectly made me cry. Best teacher ever. If I may ask, why did he show you the movie in class? Just for the hell of it? It was the last day of school. I'm the teacher. Student had missed the previous class when I handed back papers. It was a 3-hour class. She asked me for her paper at the break. I gave it to her, and then had to watch her cry for an hour in class over her B+. New rule for myself: never ever give papers back until the end of class, so students can go cry over their B+ grades in private. I'm a TA at a university. I've had 3 students come to my office this week crying that they received an A instead of an A. When I tell them there's nothing more I can do in that. No. There are no opportunities for extra credit. They get aggressive and start blaming everything and everyone for their failure and how much it is going to ruin their GPA and the rest of their lives. Ask me if I was alright. BC, I looked a bit down. Spoiler, I wasn't alright and cried for like 10 minutes. That's the worst. When you're barely holding it together and someone asks about you and you just lose it. I once watched a teacher lead a chant making fun of a kid in 6th grade, 1991. He started crying and sat in his seat. The teacher was a real jerk. What was the chant? Brad's a girl. In 1st grade, I had a teacher. We'll call her MRS. Capital R. That became a royal itch halfway through the year. I can remember one time she refused to let me go use the restroom. I obeyed like a good boy and waited until I couldn't handle it anymore. I asked once more and she refused, resulting in me pissing myself in front of the whole class. When she found out what happened, she yelled at me, called me a baby and sent me to the principal. My parents became suspicious and complained to the school board. They had friends on the board. Turns out, MRS R was going through a nasty divorce at the time and was taking her anger out on us. I was moved to a different class shortly after and never saw her again. My 1st grade teacher made me apologize to the whole class for making a mistake during a game. Here's how the game worked. All of the students sit in a circle, and then you count by 5 around the circle. I didn't know how to count by 5. But the teacher thought that I was saying the wrong answers on purpose. She seemed to pick on me for the whole year. For seemingly no reason. Not me, but plenty of other kids. My best friend actually told me before I started the class he feeds on children's tears. He loves to make as many people cry as possible. It was drama class. And at one point a bunch of us were just sitting watching a scene which only required like 2 or 3 students. None of the rest of us were going to get called up because they were just running that scene over and over. One girl had her phone sitting upside down in her lap. She wasn't looking at it. Wasn't touching it. And even if she was, it wouldn't have been a big deal. The teacher screamed at her. Tore her apart for a good 5 minutes. She tried to defend herself, but he just wouldn't have it. Kept screaming. Eventually sent her to the office in tears. In 1st grade we were having a movie day and laying on the floor. My teacher was kinda older. Maybe about 60ish. She was going to her desk and stepped over my head. She was wearing a skirt and no underwear. Didn't cry, but I'm scarred for life. My papers in my binders got disorganized, so I was trying to organize them again. He got mad, picked up my binder, and threw it across the classroom. I was 7. My dad was violent with me too sometimes, so my male teacher doing this to me at school overwhelmed me. Struck the back part of my head because I didn't complete the homework. The homework was, and I am not lying, to memorize the entire chapter of several books, including geography. For each word that I missed, he would strike me once. I told my mom and she was like, "You can do it. Try focusing on your studies more." He tore my comic books as they were in my table, quoting, "This is a place to study." He also threatened to kill me once by strangling me in the throat. And that's when I cried out of fear. I was in first grade. My PE coach really did not like me. She was always putting me in timeout for breaking the rules. Rules I didn't even know were rules. Like sliding or swinging on your belly or picking up rocks off of the playground. One day we were playing a game of telephone in the cafeteria on a rainy day. The girl who whispered in my ear, well, I couldn't understand her. It just sounded like wet spitting in my ear. I asked her to repeat herself and she did. Wet spitting. At that point I was scrambling to make something up to pass along. And the coach was loudly pressing me to hurry up and think of something. I guess I thought about it too long. Because she snapped at me that I'd ruined the game. And then she put my nose in the corner for the rest of playtime while everyone else played. I just sat there quietly crying. And I wasn't even allowed to look out the window at the rain because she'd tell me to turn my head back to the wall. Not in class, but in the cafeteria. I was a really skinny kid due to genetics, high metabolism. And one of the cafeteria volunteers thought I was starving myself. So she decided to try to force feed me. Of course I completely lost my appetite and began crying. I can't remember what happened afterwards. Most likely my mom came in and had a stern talking with administration. That lady never bothered me again. This was probably in 3rd or 4th grade. Only once. When I was 10. I'd written a book report for the first time. Without any real input from her about how to analyze story or what to write down. She skimmed it, crumpled it up and threw it in the garbage after about a minute. 10-year-old me worked hard on that report. 3rd grade teacher decided we had to do a family tree. Wait. But MRSH face. Little Coffee Bean's mom died. And her dad is in jail over it. As of last summer. Maybe assign something less horrid? MRS. Itch face cared not and treated Little Coffee Bean like the unwanted stray cat. Mind-trippingly enough, MRSH face had a twin sister who substituted. Twin was a kind, sweet woman. Physically identical except radically different hair. 3rd grade was a mind duck. During my senior year in college, I had proposed to my girlfriend of 4 years. She said yes. Looking back, I wasn't there on a maturity level. Nothing serious like cheating or anything. But I was kind of self-absorbed in my own world. Anyways. Fiancé called off the wedding. I went into the teacher's office hours the next day. Barely able to function. And broke down on how I couldn't go to class that day. And spilled the whole story. This was an electives class. Intro to African American Studies. The teacher looked me in the eye. And only said, "Do you have a place to stay?" With the calmest, most serious voice ever. I cried some more. Fortunately I grew up about 40 minutes away from the university, so I did have somewhere to stay. As a white male who was a jerk at the time. This professor opened my eyes a whole hell of a lot. Don't worry. This story does have a happy ending. Got my sheet together. Got back with the girl. And this past spring celebrated our 17th wedding anniversary. And have 2 wonderful sons together. 1st grade got whacked on the hand with a ruler and it wasn't me talking. When I was in 8th grade I took English with everyone's favorite teacher. One day in class he was announcing our grades for the semester. And he said, "If you want to hear it, say yes. If not, say no." Well, I knew I was failing, so when he came to me I said no. And he said in front of the whole class, "Well, you have a 56. And if you did your homework you'd have an 85. You're gonna get eaten alive in high school. Thanks. Big dig." In junior high my math teacher stopped class to call my parents and tell them what a bad student I was. She didn't get an answer so she left a voicemail. She did this in front of a class full of students and it was my birthday. After school I've never biked home so fast. I was trying to get there before my parents so I could delete the message. But I arrived at home to find my dad listening to it. When the message finished he just stared at me without saying anything and pressed repeat. I got to class right on time and rushed to my seat in 3rd grade. In 3rd grade we had clothespins we had to move on a board in the side of the classroom to indicate what lunch we were having or if we brought lunch. I brought lunch every day. I forgot to move the clothespin before sitting down because I was in a rush. The teacher also had a chart with clips on it for each student going from green to yellow to red etc. to indicate behavior. She moved my clip to yellow because I forgot to move the lunch clip. Yes, I cried because I'm a goody, and yes, I hold a grudge still. My 4th grade teacher also made me cry because I was asked to answer a question on the board and couldn't see without my glasses and she sent me in the hall because she thought I just didn't want to answer. I also cried in 5th grade. And probably the rest as well. I'm a bit of a cribby lol.